Hello and good morning. I'm happy to welcome you to yet another session of the NPTEL course Postmodernism in Literature. Today's lecture is titled Postmodern Fiction by Women, Reading Atwood's The Edible Woman. I begin today's session by drawing your attention to one of the pertinent questions asked by Brian Niccol in his Cambridge Introduction to Postmodern Fiction. A cursory glance at the roster of prominent names in the postmodern debate might lead to an obvious question. Where have all the women gone? So, we begin asking this question in order to enter the postmodern writings by women fiction authors. If we also take a cursory glance at the discussions that we have had till date, we also notice that postmodernism has been predominantly a male forte, which with only a few discussions on women, particularly when we talk about very pressing aspects related to gender or about feminism. Otherwise, we too have been mostly focusing on the male writers, on the male theorists. Feminism and the discussions on gender come in only as a corollary to the primary discussions on postmodernism. Brian Niccol, as he pursues this question, he also makes this argument that women have not been absent, but they have been rendered invisible due to the particular ways in which canon has been shaped. To read his own words, there are great women writers wherever we care to look in literary history. The problem is that for us to recognize them as great, they have to be isolated by literary critics from a masculinist frame of reference that limits them. They have to be judged on grounds other than those set out by masculinist views of art. So, in this course, it is important to reiterate that women have not really been absent even within the postmodernist frame of reference, but they have mostly been rendered invisible due to the particular ways in which the postmodern strategies and the postmodernist discussions have been framed. Even in this course, we have taken a look at some of the women who have redefined and shaped the discussions related to postmodernism. We have taken a look at a very brief look at Helen Sixu, Rusi Irigaray and Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, and we have also taken a look at how Donna Haraway addresses the issue of the cyborg. There are also certain other women theorists who have helped redefine the question of postmodernism, such as Jacqueline Rose, Teresa de Lauretis, Angela McRobbie and Judith Williamson. It is within such a context that we also begin looking at the postmodern fiction written by women, and we also use Molly Hyde's observation as an entry point to this discussion that postmodern fiction by women looks different from postmodern fiction by men. In the last couple of sessions, we have also taken a look at some of the important postmodern fiction written by men. So, today we look at the postmodern fiction written by women, particularly focusing on Margaret Atwood's fictional writings. Before we begin talking about Margaret Atwood and her oeuvre of postmodernist fiction, it is important to notice that the women writings, especially within the framework of postmodernism, has been seen in very different ways. For example, if you take a look at Jeanette Winterson written on the body, we realize that the narrator's gender is not specified, which makes it very postmodernist in the sense that there is no finality and a total rejection of all kinds of categories, including the gender. Even a closer reading of the text does not give us a sense of the narrator's gender, and this particular narrator, he or she, often reminisces about affairs with people of either sex, leaving us confused about the sexuality of the narrator itself. It could be either heterosexual or homosexual or even both. And Winterson's postmodernism in most of her novels has been seen as being coupled with a lesbian feminist agenda. This has also been seen as a serious limitation of her postmodernist agenda by some of the critics. Jeanette Winterson also is known for her increased commitment to experiment and an irreverent attitude towards moral and literary issues, and she also dabbles endlessly with exaggerated and pointless experiment, gender spite, and she also sees language as a world and an end in itself. These are definitely very pertinent postmodernist elements. But however, Winterson's postmodernism has been seen as slightly problematic by many critics. For example, her postmodernism is a compromise by her political agenda. She of course disregards the importance of gender and downplays sexism and homophobia. But however, the focus on the protagonist's need for love weakens her postmodernist stance, and many also feel that her commitment has been seen as predominantly modernist rather than postmodernist. Commenting on Jeanette Winterson's novels and the postmodernist approach adopted in that, Lynn Pickett notes, Winterson's postmodernism is postmodernist not in the sense of constituting a break with modernism or superseding it, but rather as a collaborative dialogue with modernism which continues what Winterson sees as a modernist project. So, Winterson's postmodernism has been seen as more as an extension of the modernist project than as an exemplary of postmodernist project itself. And Lisa Moore also is in agreement when she talks about the problematic which is inherent in Winterson's articulations. Lisa Moore writes, readers of Cyberpunk and David Lodge, for example, will find in Winterson's novels a perhaps disturbing faith in the transforming powers of romantic love, a romantic investment in self-knowledge and sexual obsession that accords ill with postmodern conventions of irony and isolation. While we have observed in a couple of earlier sessions that postmodernism and feminism do inform each other and do shape each other when it comes to the theoretical concepts, a number of critics have pointed out the incompatibility when both are made to sit together, particularly within the field of literature. As Bonnie Zimmerman points out, one of the problems connecting the two when it comes to literature is that most women writers, no matter their feminist credentials, remain committed to realism for creating an authentic female voice and to portraying authentic female voice. The reason why Zimmerman finds the coming together of feminism and postmodernism as being problematic is that the feminist writers seem to be very committed to the ideas of realism and also to the ideas of representing an authentic female voice and portraying an authentic female voice. So, this needs to be addressed in a very different manner when we come to talk about postmodern fiction written by women, and which is where Brian Niccol, the author of the Cambridge Introduction to Postmodernist Fiction, he makes a very pertinent intervention by arguing that not all postmodernist women writers are the same. We can find certain feminist postmodernist writers who are able to move away from the ideals of realism and also who are not tied to the commitment of portraying authentic female voices. And as an example, he gives the cases of Angela Carter, Margaret Atwood, Kathy Acker and Toni Morrison. We've already taken a look at the works of Toni Morrison, and we've seen how even while talking about an authentic black experience, she's able to move away from the realist tradition, and she's also able to move away from the accurate historical narrations. And in this session, in today's lecture, we shall be focusing on Margaret Atwood's works, and since she's also been seen as one of the foremost storytellers of the feminist postmodernist tradition. Brian Niccol shows how women and postmodernism can be read together within the oeuvre of postmodernist fiction. According to him, their work directs its postmodern techniques towards uncompromisingly feminist ends, and they also continually insist on what is different about female experience of the contemporary world. And this is why he feels this needs to be taken into account, because their works are also firmly anti-realist. And Margaret Atwood, even when she is portraying a certain kind of a female experience, we find that she is also employing methods of anti-realism and also successfully maneuvering through the challenges of portraying authentic female experience within postmodern strategies. Margaret Atwood was born in 1939. She is considered as one of the most successful and the best known Canadian writer of international repute. Her work could be described as part of historical fiction, science fiction and speculative fiction. And today we discuss her first novel published in 1969 titled The Edible Woman. This novel has often been seen as a critique of North American consumer society in the 1960s, that too from a woman's feminist point of view. And this has been seen as a feminist social satire. The work has been seen as both a funny and bitingly satiric at the same time, and this also incidentally happens to be the novel which anticipated the trends of feminism in the works of Doris Lessing and Toni Morrison. This is a context in which the work Edible Woman has been produced. This was written in the 1960s, which also happens to witness the initial stages of women's liberation movement, particularly in America. This was also the beginning of second wave feminism, particularly the year 1969. This work in that sense has been seen as a proto-feminist novel, as Atwood herself has described the work. And she was extremely influenced by Simone de Beauvoir and Betty Friedan, who were pioneers in feminist writings and criticism. Some of the pressing concerns of the novel include deconstructing gender politics, the indictment of male consumption over richness, and the over-decoration of women in a patriarchal capitalist consumer society. If we recall our discussions of the starting moments, the starting points of postmodernism in the Western context, we notice that 1960s were an important decade in shaping the beginnings of post-structuralism as well as postmodernism. And it is in this context that the relevance of this novel also needs to be seen. And the concerns of the novel also include the ways in which the novel envisages the passive, subordinate and vulnerable status of women. And through this narrative, Atwood also tries to successfully reshape the dynamics of gender. And we also begin by looking at The Edible Woman, this being one of the earliest feminist postmodernist works available, to see how in the beginning there was a way in which gender was beginning to be questioned, gender was beginning to be seen as a category which also needs to be rejected. We shall also be later taking a look at one of the later novels of Atwood to see how her concerns have progressively moved towards a more fitting postmodernist framework. Coming back to a discussion on The Edible Woman, this is the plot of the novel. The novel's title, The Edible Woman, refers to a doll-shaped cake which is cooked and consumed by the protagonist towards the end of the novel. And the reference to the edible woman is also reference to the protagonist of the novel, Marian McAlpin, and she is preoccupied with food throughout her life, and she also interprets life around her in terms of food consumption. And as the novel progresses, as and when she goes through certain crises in her life and relationships, she also develops an eating disorder. The novel is about successfully resolving certain issues in her life as and when she also struggled with these disorders in relation to her consumption patterns and in relation to her eating disorders. The novel is divided into 3 parts. The first part includes the first 12 chapters, and it's in the first person narrative, and we also find a very confident self narrating the story. And this is the story of Marian McAlpin's relationship to Peter, and in the first part we also find this relationship culminating in their engagement to marry, and there are also descriptions of other romantic relationships in her immediate circle of friends. So in the first part, through a first person narrative, the novel assumes a very traditional conventional plot structure and also engages with some of the traditional ways in which gender and relationships have been seen. In the second part, the novel moves to a third person narrative from chapters 13 to 30, and during this phase the novel also outlines Marian's growing discomfort with the prospect of marrying Peter, and her body also develops certain discomfort with food, and this forms a major section of the narrative in the second part. Here we find Atwood moving away from the conventional attributes of realism and the traditional notions of gender. She also begins to use a lot of images and metaphors of food and consumption. This can also be read as a critique of contemporary consumerist society in America. And in the third part, which comprises of just one chapter, chapter 31, we find the narrative coming back to the first person, and this is also more in terms of self-discovery. We find a resolution to both of these dilemmas, the struggles in terms of Marian's relationship and also the struggles she faces in terms of her eating disorder. And we find her towards the end cooking, serving and eating the doll-shaped cake, which is also one of the most telling scenes in the novel. And this is how the novel describes Marian's performance towards the end. This also has been seen as one of the excellent renditions of feminist articulation in contemporary women's writing. So I read to you from the conclusion of the novel. She went into the kitchen and returned bearing the platter with a cake in front of her, carefully and with reverence, as though she was carrying something sacred in a procession, an icon or the crown on a cushion in a play. She knelt, setting the platter on the coffee table in front of Peter. "You've been trying to destroy me, haven't you?" she said. "You've been trying to assimilate me, but I've made you a substitute, something you like much better. This is what you really wanted all along, isn't it? I'll get you a fork," she added somewhat prosaically. Peter stared from the cake to her face and back again. She wasn't smiling. His eyes widened in alarm. Apparently, he didn't find her silly. So this scene parodies the ways in which women have been seen as objects for consumption, and she also offers herself as well as a cake to Peter for him to consume. And ironically, she consumes herself in this act, and this is also seen as a very telling performance of the gender roles towards the end of the novel. And this can be seen not as a realist depiction, but as a very ironical black humor which is being displayed over here. We also find in the male character a sense of discomfort, a sense of unsettling towards the end. When we examine Margaret Atwood's novels, we find that Atwood's women have been created in a very different way. She successfully maintains a tension between the representation of a woman as a subject and a victim. And we also find in this novel, in The Edible Woman, the character Marion transforming herself from being a victim to being a subject. She also assumes agency towards the end of the novel. And the depiction of the woman as an agent capable of resisting or eluding patriarchal control is the transition that Atwood's women undergo in the course of the novel. And as mentioned before, in the first part of the novel, though it begins in a very traditional way with a stereotypical depiction of relationships and about gender roles, towards the end we find the same tool being used as to subvert and to reverse the roles which are being performed. And if we particularly look at the character in The Edible Woman, Marion McAlpin, she resists male control and definition. And this is a transformation that the novel successfully portrays through her relationship with Peter, and also in terms of her changing nature of attitude towards food. She also parodies a male fantasy of woman as an edible commodity, and this parody, in the particularly in the section that I read out to you from the conclusion of the novel, it doesn't really entice the male character. On the contrary, it only evokes feelings of horror and feelings of disbelief in him. And Marion McAlpin can be seen as a character in search of the independent individuality in the patriarchal system. So here, by portraying a character who is initially fitting well within the patriarchal structure, Atwood is successfully using the same character to subvert and to totally thwart the ideals of ideals of patriarchy. And if we look at some of the images and symbols which are available throughout the novel, we find a very succinct connection between consumption and patriarchal domination. And this also leads us to recall some of the discussions that we had in the context of feminism and the culture of consumption, the contemporary, and how both engage in a dialogue with each other. The symbolic elements of capitalism and materialism can be seen throughout the novel through the images of food, eating, clothes and gatherings. They also form a major kind of a critique against the American consumerist culture which was engulfing it from the 1960s onwards. Atwood's novel The Edible Woman can also be seen for the significance that it accords to gender, body and food. The novel tells us how regulations of gender norms inform one's action through the performativity of gender. Here we may also call the discussions on gender performativity that we had in the context within the framework of postmodernism. And the discussion of identity and self we find is mingled to the concept of body and gender. And here, as a character Marion goes through different phases in her life, we find that her loss of self is also equated with loss of desire for food. So here's a way in which gender, body and food are seen as different parts of the same kind of identity which is being constituted within the character Marion McAlpin. Atwood at some level is also drawing her attention to Marion's gender trouble. And Marion is a woman in that sense who is in the process of becoming something. She's also undergoing the process of choosing her gender, and this process can be seen as a recognition of herself. The novel begins with the very stereotyped female characteristics, and then it tries to reject the sexual gender norms, and this is the point in which we identify Marion's gender trouble. To further underscore the connection between food and consumption, we see that initially non-eating by the character Marion is equated with powerlessness, but gradually this non-eating also assumes a very powerful state of protest against that powerlessness itself. So by not eating, by developing an eating disorder, by rejecting certain kinds of consumption, the character Marion is also rejecting an exploitative predatory consumer culture. And towards the end, when she tries to resolve this dilemma, we also find her consuming her own image and also offering that in a platter in a rather ceremonious way to the male figure who has always been getting a lot of pleasure in the act of consumption. And this parody itself questions and subverts many ideas related to food, consumption and also gender. The metaphor of the body comes across as being very powerful in the novel, and we find that the gradual loss of appetite is also linked to the denial of the self. So, the consumption of the food and the identity of the self is also connected to each other in particular ways. And the abomination to food is also being seen as a psychological disenchantment that the protagonist Marion develops. The novel in that sense exposes and subverts the ideological constructs that have long defined and confined women within certain kinds of Western patriarchal consumerist societies. Having taken a look at how the edible woman talks about feminism and postmodernism through the story of Marion McAlpin, we also need to take a look at one of the later novels written by Atwood herself, which is titled Handmaid's Tale. So, as when we begin to wrap up today's discussion, I also leave you in anticipation of discussion of Atwood's novel in the next session, which is titled Handmaid's Tale. And I also encourage you to read through these novels, as they would also enhance your understanding of feminism and postmodernism and how they could be applied within particular literary critical frameworks. So with this, we wind up the discussion for today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.